welcome back to Season 3 of Teacher Chat. We are here today, all things special education. And so I have three phenomenal folks that are with me today. Starting to my left is Keith Adams, who's been in the district for quite some time, a little bit longer than I have. So he'll share a little bit about his background in a minute. Dr. Tracy Arway, who serves in on our special education team at the district level, and then our executive director of special education and gifted education, Dr. Mickey Nelson. And so, as our listening audience probably knows, special education is a very unique and in some ways challenged space to be in right now, nationally and certainly locally as well. And so here at Teacher Chat, we value centering teacher voice. I am demonstrating courage in having this conversation with people who I know will be very honest with our listeners. And so, but that's the purpose. We want to make sure that we're being transparent, that we're being engaging, so that we can move forward in a positive way. So we believe that dialogue does make a difference, and sharing perspectives, getting perspectives, thinking through solutions is the way that we can most effectively make progress. So first of all, thank you to my guests for being here, for sharing a little bit of your time with us. If you're not able to see on video, I was told that Dr. Nelson has some very cute boots on, so maybe that will get captured in the shot. I don't know. But in all seriousness, why don't we start with you, Mickey? Just share a little bit about yourself, your history in the district, how you've come to this work, and then we'll go from Mickey to Tracy to Keith.
Okay. So this is the start of my 5th year. I was hired in as director of compliance a couple of years ago, obviously right in the middle of COVID. And so my first year was pretty much remote. And then over the course of some changes within our department and with folks that were leaving the district, I was moved into the executive director role, and we added gifted to that responsibility. Prior to that, I worked in a couple other districts, Olentangy, and then Sylvania prior to that. I got my start in education as a school psychologist. So I started as a school psych.
So tell our listeners, this is Sylvania, not Transylvania.
Yeah,
so where is Sylvania?
Sylvania is up right outside Northwest Ohio.
Got it. Okay.
I'm from Toledo initially, and so I graduated from Toledo Public Schools. Certainly not the same as Columbus Public, but also have always had a passion for working with students and public education and public educators. And overall, I think being here in Columbus definitely has its challenges, but there, I believe, more benefits to working here. Lots of strengths that we don't always get to hear about and talk about. So I'm glad to be here with the other panelists, and we'll share more about that later.
Awesome. Dr. Arway.
So I'm Tracy Arway. This is my 24th year in the district, all years in special education. I started my career at Clearbrook Middle School, teaching at the ED separate facility for 4 years. Moved to Livingston Elementary and taught high incidence for 2 years before I transitioned over to MD, which SLCs now. Mm-hmm. So I've taught middle school, elementary school, every type of classroom our district has. The only thing I didn't do was high school when I was in the classroom. I became a special ed coordinator for the non-public schools. So my first 8 years of being a coordinator, I worked with all 37 private schools that sit inside of Columbus City Schools, and I also helped with the John Peterson and Autism Scholarship, and transitioned to public schools 4 years ago, and have been in Region 4 as a coordinator, and I still do help with the Autism and John Peterson Scholarship. So.
Nice. And last but certainly not least, from the champion middle school, Keith Adams.
The best school in the district.
Oh, watch out.
Keith Adams. I am originally from Southern Ohio. I started teaching for Scioto County, what was formerly the MRDD program, now Developmental Disabilities Program. Taught there for 8 years. Been with Columbus City Schools for 22 years now. Started out at Sherwood Middle School, moved to Beery Middle School, 1 year at Northland High School in an intervention specialist role, kind of working with teachers in that high school. And then now I've been at Champion for the remainder, 12, 13, 14 years or so. Definitely love what I do. I've always worked in special education in my career in education. Can't imagine doing anything else if I'm going to go to work every day. And so this is where it is.
And so here's what I can say about each of our guests today is they definitely have a passion for the work and for students, right? Tracy's laughing at me over here because she knows. But, when we're passionate, right, there's intensity that's there. Sometimes there's we advocate, and we should, right? But in all seriousness, I mean, I've seen each of you all in your work, in your craft, and thank you for the work that you do, particularly right now when it's tough to do this work. And Mickey, I spent a little time with your team, just sharing and hearing. Because I think it's important. And so what I want to do, I'm going to give some very high-level comments. And then, Mickey, I'd like you to lean in, help our listeners understand some of the nuances of the acronyms that we use. I mean, because we said SLC, we've said MD, and some of these things have changed over time. I think a lot of the folks listening probably have an inkling. Most people listening are teachers, but not all. And so even for teachers, that's a helpful review. And I think for me, the high-level framing of this is that we are in a nationwide teaching shortage. There has been anecdotal and some quantitative evidence that we're coming out of that nationally. Locally, we're doing pretty well, but like a lot of places, more challenge as it relates to STEM subjects like math and science. But certainly special education, by all accounts, data that I've looked at and folks that I've talked to, still is a real challenge nationally and certainly for us locally. And what we mean by that is we're looking for folks, right? So if you're out there, if you're a listener and you are a special education licensed teacher, we want you. So that obviously is a big challenge. I think coupled with that, and I'm sure Dr. Nelson will share some of this context as well, we have had locally, and this has been nationally as well, a proliferation and increased amount of identification of students with disabilities coming out of the pandemic. So you sort of have, in some regards, a perfect storm. You have a dearth of teachers, right? Right now, we don't have as many teachers that are coming into the profession specifically to be teachers for students with students, servicing students with special needs. And we have this increased amount of students being identified with disabilities, particularly autism. And so in that, we find ourselves in a space where it's a little bit like a sandwich, right? And there's a squeeze that's there. And I think we're all feeling the love, right? And so, it can be a little bit like a pressure cooker at times. And I think, how we respond, how we react in these moments is most indicative of who we are as leaders, as people. And my hope is that as a system, and I've seen us do this, that when it's tight like this, we lean in more, we listen harder, right? We spend a little bit more time in a space of appreciation to really hear and understand. Sometimes people just need to be heard. Other times they need to be heard and they need for stuff to be done, right? And so trying to strike that balance, for me, as a system leader, is important. So, Mickey, I would invite you into the conversation to share, with our listeners a little bit more context about sort of where we are, with SPED, and also sort of just your line of sight on, the challenges, the opportunities that we're facing as a system right now.
Yeah, so I think one of the things, as I said, this is the start of my 5th year, and we have always gone through during our summer months of this balance of the number of students that move out of our district and then the number of students that move into our district. And we've always, prior to COVID, the pandemic, it's kind of balanced itself out. Since the pandemic, what we've seen is we are continuing to identify students, as you mentioned, at a high rate, especially under the category of autism. And we're not seeing the same number of students move out of our district. So that's the benefit, is that we have people that are choosing Columbus City Schools. The difficulty with that, or the reaction to that, is our staffing levels. Having a staffing level that allows us to serve the needs of all students and be able to serve those students in a differentiated manner. Right now, we are struggling just to find spaces in classrooms for students, so somebody like a Mr. Adams could have a student that has very high in one area but very low in another area. And instead of being able to group students more based on their skills and ability, we're having to simply place students in classrooms where it's very difficult to differentiate that wide breadth and depth of need. As you mentioned, nationally, we know that the numbers, we're currently now identifying 1 in every, I think, 36 students are children with autism, where 10 years ago, it was 1 in 150 students with autism. So that is another manifestation, I believe, of the pandemic, that we are now seeing those students enter kindergarten, and they did not have the same opportunity during the pandemic as students prior to that. So they're coming in with less ability, less skill, and the needs in our K1 and 2 classrooms in Gen Ed are very great, which is then creating this high level of evaluation at those grade levels. So we would normally be able to give students more time. There is this sense of urgency to get kids what they need, and it is increasing our numbers on caseloads that we have never seen before. Another unique challenge is we are a large urban district, so we see more growth or more students move in on the daily than other areas. Not all areas, but a lot of our district colleagues across the state have more of a stagnant enrollment pattern. Our enrollment pattern continues as we see all these great things moving into the Columbus and the metro area. Well, we have families moving in with children who have needs. And so I think, as you mentioned, that the idea of the perfect storm, we've got these 3 or 4 things that are happening at the same time that if we were just had one of them to focus on would be challenging enough, but we have 3 or 4 challenges that we're trying to work through and balance and find the solutions necessary to make sure that not only do we serve our kids with the very best learning experience that they could have, but also that our teachers have the most amazing teaching experience that they can have. And I think just what we're seeing nationally with national trends with staffing, national trends with identification under the category of autism, and then some of the challenges that are unique to Columbus, we're seeing this huge explosion of the number of kids we need to serve, and we don't have enough staff to do that. And so those are the challenges that we work through every day, and continuing to try to find those opportunities to enhance what we do, so that this does not become our norm. This becomes a season that we can look back on and say, we got through it.
So thank you for that. And so quickly, can you give us high level the different categories,
Sure.
And sort of what that means for our staff?
Yeah. So, well, first and foremost, I think we start with no matter what a student has diagnosed outside of the district, so a hospital or a pediatrician or a doctor or whomever, there is medical diagnoses of various things. But then we have our federal and state laws that we follow. So there are 13 categories that students can qualify under for school age. I'm not going to remember all 13 of them, but to hit a couple highlights, autism.
Tracy has a minute.
Autism, specific learning disability. And these are what are recognized by the federal government to say, yes, these are the 13 categories. We do our eval, and if the student meets certain criteria, they would then qualify under a particular category. Once we get that initial eligibility determined, then we write the IEP, and then the IEP is where we start talking about service. So
And
with
the IEP is an
individualized education plan.
There you
So,
go.
yep. So we have currently in the district about 9,735 students on IEPs.
Okay.
And
Out of a total student population around
45,
45 to 46. that's
Yeah.
what they say.
46,000. Yeah.
so we're, I think, the last we checked, about 18% of our population is identified with a disability. Once we write that IEP, within that IEP, that is where we note the location of service. And that is where we get into those classroom types. So we used to have lots of different categories for classroom type, and it was separated by, am I serving kids in K1 and 2 or 6 and 7? What we've done is we've shrunk those to 3 categories. So we have 3 classroom types. Our learning center classroom is what we call it. That's more of our traditional resource room where students are kind of in and out throughout the day for an academic need primarily. So maybe they're in the general ed setting for reading, but they come for math services. So kind of your learning center, fluctuating, flexible, kids are in and out. Our social emotional learning center, or SELC, is for students that have emotional challenges or mental health needs. So same kind of thing. It's a resource room. Some kids are in there longer parts of the day. Some kids are in there for short parts of the day. But they're there primarily to receive those supports for mental health and behavior. Our third classroom, which has seen the biggest increase in student, is our specialized learning center. Used to be called MD classroom or OI, orthopedic impairment classroom. Our specialized learning centers, or SLCs, are those classrooms that serve students that have multiple areas of need, sometimes with autism, sometimes without. And these are our students that spend the majority of their day, due to their disabilities, with their intervention specialist, Mr. Adams, where he serves as the teacher of record for all the academics, provides skill building and social skills or increased communication, all those different things related to being able to be in school and be successful.
Okay.
So
And that's where our students with autism would be for the most part.
for the most part,
Okay.
Well, I would say no, because autism is a spectrum.
Gotcha.
So we have students who have an eligibility of autism, and they may have an executive functioning goal. So those students would be served in an LC.
Yes.
Right.
So because it's such a big spectrum, I think is why we're seeing the that ratio of 1 in every 36, I think is what
Yeah.
you said, instead of 1 in every 200, is because of that spectrum. So our
So some are higher functioning in terms of
yeah.
some have less challenges that impact their access to education.
Got it.
So, and then others have significant
Right.
impact, and those are the ones that would be in SLC. So, I think to clarify Mickey's point earlier, the eligibility category doesn't mandate what setting you are receiving your services in, and autism is that perfect example of that.
because for our listeners, right, we want the students in the least restrictive environment.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And they say if you've met someone with autism, you've met one person with autism. It's your autism isn't like someone else's autism isn't like someone else's autism. So to say you have autism and so you need an SLC is not true, because if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person
Very
with
different.
autism.
It presents
Yeah.
differently
Yeah.
for each individual.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, Keith, I want to, go to you next and sort of give us a grounding in the classroom experience. I mean, you've been in Columbus for a while. Currently, you're in an SLC setting. But certainly you've been in different spaces. What have you seen sort of as the evolving nature of the work since you've been doing it for 20 plus years now?
Well, I mean, this year, of course, it's been completely different because of the expanded use of an SLC as opposed to what was a typical, what we would have called an MD or an MH classroom. When I first started teaching it, I taught in an MH classroom.
Okay.
But then it was moved to what we would call an MD classroom for students with multiple disabilities. And now it's an SLC. And so what Mickey was talking about, where we would have a wider range of students. Dr. Nelson was talking about, we have just students that might have higher level of needs up here, lower level of needs down here. It is harder to meet the needs of all of the students at the same time because they're all in the classroom. We are blessed in Columbus when we are fully staffed to have 2 instructional assistants in our classrooms when we are fully staffed, and that does help. I do teach in a middle school, so I do have kids coming in and out. So right now, traditionally, I would have had 8 students in the classroom. Right now, I have 11 on my roster. They're every day. Love all those guys. They're amazing. But, in meeting those needs, I'm thankful for my instructional assistants. Could not do my job without them. The paraprofessionals are in my classroom. But in order to be able to meet the needs of the students, in a situation and in our district, we have had classrooms, and I've been, I guess, fortunate enough that typically my students have been kind of in a situation where they've been kind of all along the same area. They've been at the same levels, so I could meet their needs all closely, and to keep them moving along, to keep them meeting their goals and objectives, to keep them on moving closer to grade level, to the standards, because we're not just teaching right where they are. We want to take the standard, break it down. We want to help them move to get closer, but we want more than 1 year of growth if we can get that. We want those kinds of things. And we're going to address their IEP as well. So when we're collecting that SDI, I'm all over the place right now because I've got, 11 students. Some of them are reading, but I've got students who are also learning to identify letters and sounds and those kinds of things. So it's completely different.
And so talk to us about SDI, specially designed instruction.
Yes.
So everyone may not know what
you
mean
so
by that.
Specially designed instruction, and I do need to to collect that data, and I need to make sure that I'm able to collect that data and be able to record that data in their progress reports. When we send home grades, yes, I do grades just like everyone else does, but I also need to be able to send home progress reports that have that specific data included in the progress reports so that their parents understand what's going on. Not just that their parents have that, but that's also mandated that I record that data. Like I have to have that information recorded. It's part of that federal mandate. So,
and I do think that the challenge that we have, and I think gen ed teachers would say the same thing. When Mr. Adams is creating his classroom and he's trying to provide that instruction, he's got 3 kids working at this level and 2 kids working here and 1 child working here, and yet not only is he providing that gen ed piece, and that he's also then making sure that each one of those students' individual IEP goals are being addressed through specially designed instruction, accommodations, modifications. And so the span that we're seeing in our special education classrooms is greater than what we're seeing in our gen ed classrooms, which I think is different for us than, like you were saying a couple of years ago, where you could cluster kids together. Now you've got 1 here and 1 here and 1 here, and you've got 11 of that.
And I think a lot of people think, oh, just 11 students and you have an assistant or something. So that can't be that bad. But I've got students who do need frequent prompting to stay on task. They need help. They need that.
And then also students who at the middle school, high school level are still having toileting needs, maybe need help feeding, can't zip their coats up.
And
that
lean
level
into
also.
that a little bit, because I think, I did not, and this is year 25 for me. And have been in a lot of different settings. At Independence, we had what is now we call an SLC. Wasn't called that when I was there as an assistant. But even some of the spaces that I've been in elementary schools, seemingly the needs are more significant, right? And so with personal care issues, and so help folks understand like what is going on, because I think people don't always know.
So a lot of I think the biggest change that we have seen with our student population happened when some of the county programs lost their funding, and the students who had more significant needs in those areas of self-help, social, emotional, those students in maybe 7 or 8 years ago were in county developmental disability programs. When those started phasing out for our younger students, that's when our elementary level especially started getting students with more significant needs, not only cognitively, but with those self-help skills. So when we look at students in an SLC, and actually even some of our general education students, they're coming in without toilet training, which I can't imagine being a general education kindergarten teacher who has 25 children and someone who also needs toilet training. But that's what we're seeing. I personally like to blame the pandemic when daycares were shut down. I thank goodness for the daycares when my children were that age because they helped with the consistency of toilet training. It's hard to do when you're trying to work at home and have your kids because that's what the pandemic forced us all to do. So we're seeing a decrease in those abilities of our students. Like when they're coming in, they have more needs, no matter if they're an identified student with disability or not. And then a typical SLC at the elementary level, you can have 11 children, 1 instructional assistant, 1 teacher, and all of those kids could need toilet training help, need help with feeding. Not be oral communicators, so may have communication devices, may not even be ready yet for communication devices. Everyone can communicate, just not everyone orally, so we have a lot of aggression, but it's out of frustration because they can't get their needs met or their wants shared because they don't have that oral communication skills. So, you might often hear, oh, that student is nonverbal. Well, they're not an oral communicator, but they're telling you what they want.
Absolutely.
You know that they're frustrated, and rightfully so. A lot of, unfortunately, with not just in Columbus, but everywhere, we are in that national teacher shortage, and so we are not able to provide the supports we would like to be able to provide to help make that environment less frustrating. We want students to feel safe in their classrooms, and we want them to feel safe to be able to communicate and get their needs met as soon as possible. So,
and I think to add to that, it's also all the things that students just school environment's different from home environment. So in addition to the personal care and some of the not being able to necessarily maybe feed themselves or to do that without some assistance, we also then have, from an instructional standpoint, those skills that students don't, sitting for long periods of time is not an option. I mean, we're lucky sometimes if we can get students to sit for a couple seconds and then they need a break. So in addition to all of the things we've talked about, we also have some students that have significant attention concerns where, and with 11 students, it's difficult to skill build that up to increase that time that they can attend because they're not able to do that, or their wait time for that adult support. If you don't have an adult right there, then they're going to get up and walk away, or they're going to go do so. So it's truly the challenges of students that are coming into the school environment almost for the first time.
Yeah.
That, and then because of their disabilities, need a lot more time and opportunity to develop those skills. And so that is what we're seeing, I think, continue to increase at the elementary level, which is now our friends are moving on to middle school. So everyone in our organization is having to shift, I think, their methodology because what I used to do as a teacher 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it's a different set of students that require a different set of skills and more supports built in.
And I also think curricular rigor and demands have increased for our younger students. So kindergarten used to be learning how to do school.
Right.
Well, now we rely on pre-K to be how you learn how to do school. So if you're a student who didn't attend pre-K, or you're learning how to do school when you also are expected to sit for 2 hours for a reading block as a 5 and 6 year old. Yeah, that's a lot different.
An increased demand.
That's a lot different than when all of us were in school. Absolutely. And when all of us started in education. It's changed and shifted. So, child development doesn't change. You still, like, those age-appropriate milestones don't change, but we're expecting students and requiring them to do much more at a younger age, which, hypothesis, may lead to some over-identification because the demands of the educational system is not appropriate for their actual chronological age. Just a hypothesis there.
I mean, another research project.
There you go.
We could dig deep later on that one.
So, right, I've always said, right, and I was a principal for 10 years, but I was a teacher for 9, right, and so I always considered myself a teacher, right, and it just in different ways. But I believe that teaching is a noble profession. And when I was a principal, I would always tell my teachers who were working with students with disabilities that there's a special place in heaven for special education teachers because it takes a different sort of grace, patience, to do it and do it well. And when we are so blessed and fortunate in CCS to have a lot of teachers like Mr. Adams, like Tracy Arway, who was in the classroom prior to the role that she's in now, that do this work and do it well. So I'm curious, why be a special education teacher? Like, Simon Sinek wrote this book that folks talk about this, Start With Why, and his idea was that to do anything with excellence, right, whether you're an individual or an organization or an institution, you have to have a really clear and compelling sense of your why, right? And I get the sense that that has to be the case for our teachers that are working with our students with disabilities, particularly those that have significant needs. So I'd like to hear from the two of you, and then Nikki as well. Like, what is your why? What brought you to the work? What keeps you going in this work?
Tracy said she had a funny story about this.
Watch out now.
No, so when I was in 6th grade.
Okay.
I know, we're going back, right? We're going to go way back. I was in Ashland University's production of The Miracle Worker, which is Helen Keller.
Okay.
And I actually was Helen Keller. And my mom used to tell the story how she thought I was going to come away from there wanting to be an actress because I was the star of the show. And I came away from there wanting to be Anne Sullivan.
Wow.
I was like, talk about reaching the unreachable, right? What people would think is the unreachable. And from then on, that's what I wanted to do. I applied to one college. I went there. I never changed my major. I student taught for Gen Ed. I never took the praxis, so I never got certified in Gen Ed. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work with students with disabilities. I had an IEP as a child. I now would be dyslexic, but back then it was just a reading disability. I have children who fall, who have IEPs, my own children, who have IEPs and 504 plans. And I just think that we like to put people in silos, right? And I like to say, if you have 27 kids in your classroom, ideally we'd like to be able to deliver that message 27 ways because everyone learns differently. Whether you have a documented disability or not, you're not going to learn just like the person next to you. And so I had a really terrible 6th grade teacher. Like I'm shaky now thinking about her because I might talk a lot. And she put me in a refrigerator box around my desk for the whole school year. And I'm like, no one needs to be in a classroom environment like that. And it went back to, I had just gotten done being in this play where Anne Sullivan was like, no, we're going to take this human and we're going to help them learn and grow. And having those two opposite ends of the spectrum experience around the same time in my life, I said, I want to make sure I could be a teacher in an environment where everyone feels like Anne Sullivan was their teacher, not like the teacher I had. And so that's why I became an intervention specialist.
I understand you better, Tracy. I do. I knew there was
there's
always
there's
the fire.
A driving passion.
The fire was there.
I love that you call it my passion because Dr. Walker and I have had some pretty heated conversations in our in our time together. Respectful, but
right.
heated.
That's right. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
So how about you, Keith? What do you think?
I literally thought that I would be teaching math or science. I went
Okay.
to college. I thought I was going to be teaching math or science middle school.
Uh-huh.
Didn't find a job, and I was going into my second year of subbing, and had a school district say, "Would you teach special education?" And I needed insurance, and I said, "Sure, I'll do that." And I wasn't even sure what an IEP was. I wasn't
Okay.
even sure. Like, I mean, I didn't,
Yeah.
for real.
Absolutely.
Didn't
Yeah.
know. But I started teaching, and it was like, oh, okay. I'm so glad I found it, because I would be a horrible math teacher. Because I didn't get
But it's clear to me. Like, so I came to your classroom, and I wasn't there long, right? Maybe 15 minutes or something. But it was clear to me the genuine care,
Oh, absolutely.
right, that you have, and that there was that connection and just the patience that you have with your students. Like, where does that come from? Did you have that like right from the get go, or has that always been your temperament?
I don't really have patience in my
Okay.
real life. I really do not.
Reserved for the classroom.
Yeah, in my classroom, yeah, with my kids, they're my kids.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Because
You
I
get to
don't
put
have
on your-
kids
you
of
get to
my
put on your
own.
cape and-
The
okay.
kids in my classroom are my kids, and I talk all the time in my classroom about we're a family in here, and we look out for each other, and so
It feels that way.
yeah,
It feels
so
that way.
we don't, make fun of each other. We don't talk about each other. Everybody gets, we're going to give each other what they need, and it's that way. I'm raising. I typically have boys. I'm raising young men in there like that. This is,
Right.
and I sound like my dad when I'm talking to them. I hear it all the time, but I don't. 30 years now, so it is what it is. I love what I do. I'm thinking about retirement now, but
After 30 years, you're it's okay to
You're
think
entitled.
about
yeah,
it.
exactly. Exactly, but I never looked back. I still have my gen ed license, but I've never thought about using it. I went on and got my master's degree in special education. I have my administrative licenses too, but I went and got them. Never thought that I was going to use them. I just wanted them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Mickey, your path was a little bit different,
Yep.
right? You're licensed as a school psychologist,
Yep, I was
right?
licensed
So
as a school psych.
so tell us about your
Yeah.
sort of journey.
So, and it's interesting because I think about it all the time. I started school in a small Catholic school. I had the same 27 kids I went to school with pretty much from K through 8. And during that time, as we got older, as you kind of, figure out who's good at what and, all the things, we just had, I remember distinctly kids that were struggling, and particularly in reading. And it was always about whole group reading, and we had to read out loud. And inevitably, my teachers, and oftentimes because we were small school, teachers looped, would call on kids who didn't like to read out loud, who struggled to read out loud, and yet painstakingly would go through it, but they would, and I always thought there has to be a better way to do this. Like, why are we asking kids to highlight their weaknesses all the time when it's the same 27 kids? And then as things got more challenging, as kids got older, and I just remember always thinking there has to be a better way to do this. Why are we always teaching things the same way? And then I went to high school, and high school was like I went from 27 kids to lots of kids. But my passion was always trying to figure out, and probably from the system standpoint, how we can help individual kids to figure out their strengths and highlight the strengths and not the weakness.
I could just see little Mickey saying,
Yeah.
you know what, I think we could do that a different way.
Right. And to me, it seemed so easy because I was 12 and had all the answers, but I didn't understand. And so to this day, I think about that group of kids, and particularly a couple of them that continued to always be my why. So as I got through high school and I knew I wanted to go into education, and then hearing about school psychology, which I didn't know anything about, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to help kids find their why, find their strengths. And then as a young school psych, like second or third year, I met a student that I worked with for like 2 years, had lots of family stuff. If I was probably older, I would have considered like adopting him. I mean, he just And I met with him every week and kept in touch with him. And like 5 years later, I got a note that thanked me because despite his father going to prison and his mom leaving the family and him pretty much being raised by himself and then raising his younger sisters, wrote me a letter and said, you were the one that made the difference. I graduated because of you. So I always think about like the decisions we make every day and the time and the effort that we put in does help kids. And sometimes you don't know, you don't know that you had an impact, but yet.
Or you don't know until much later.
And for me, I didn't need to know, but I just in my mind know that what we do and the decisions we make and the people we get to work with every day when we come together and do things well does make that. I mean, that's the difference for some kids. That's the difference between like it would have been this, but now it's this. And so that has always been my why and my journey. And despite all the crazy stuff, I come to work every day thinking we're going to make a decision we're going to make today that nobody's going to know about is going to impact a kid. And that's the most important thing, is that every day that student experience is profound and we do all we can.
Well, thank you all for sharing. That was very compelling. I did not teach special education, but I do have a why. I am the son of two first-generation college graduates. My grandparents, maternal and paternal, were both part of the Great Migration, so came from the South. One set from Arkansas, the other set from Louisiana. But my parents were both adamant about the value of education because for their parents, towards them, it was always at the forefront. And both of my parents chose to serve. My father was a pastor who pastored for 40 years. And whenever he can find a pulpit, he's still pastoring. My mother was a lifelong educator, kindergarten teacher, principal. But as impactful, my maternal grandmother, after having raised 7 children, and she sort of ostensibly was a stay-at-home mother, at the age of 50, went back to work as a school cafeteria manager and worked for 30 years until she was 80. And that taught me that everyone in this work that we do for kids matters. She was beloved and loved her community, so much so that when she passed, the city had a resolution in her name. And so I do this work because it is incumbent upon me to serve, right? And this work is as much, I think, for all of us, from what I've heard, a vocation, a calling, as much of it as it's a job. I don't think you could do this if you're just doing it for a paycheck. It would not be enough. So I want to begin to bring us to our closing. And I'm not a preacher, so it's not going to be the first of 3 closings. But what I will say is I'd like us to talk through a little bit, and Mickey, probably you would lead this. What are we doing? So it's kind of like the so what, now what, right? I mean, we're in this space, leaders lead, right? And so we can't be stagnant. We certainly know that we have some headwinds that we're facing that are not of our own making. But there are things that we're doing. And so if you could just talk through some of that so our listeners can get a sense of what that work is.
So I think first and foremost, the one thing that we continue to say is that we're not shying away or denying the challenge. We know that we have caseloads that are too high. We know they're higher than what we want them to be. We know that we have this shift now in the students that we're serving and the needs that we're seeing are not only in a small group of among a small group of students. It is becoming more pervasive in terms of our teachers feeling that they have the skills and they have the tools and the resources that they need to serve kids well. Because I think we all agree and believe that every one of our teachers comes into school every day to do good things for kids. Nobody comes in thinking, I'm gonna slack off today. So the fact that teachers are saying, listen, we need help, is not something that we're saying, oh, this isn't an issue. And the challenge is, and I've said this so many times, if I had a magic wand and could make it all better, we would do that in a heartbeat. Yet, as you've talked about, the challenges that we have, it's going to take some time because it's so many things layered on. But one of the things that we're doing is we are looking at our staffing level, working with our HR team, working with our budget team to take a look to see, okay, the shift in how we're identifying students, the categories that we're identifying them under. Do we have the appropriate level of staffing to be able to keep everybody with a caseload that is manageable, in the sense that not because ODE says it's manageable, ODEW, I will always forget to call them that, but it's manageable by what the needs of the students are, matched with the expertise of that teacher, is extremely important to us. So we are looking at our staffing level as a whole. Among the district, we currently have about 520 special education teachers that serve our students every day. So making sure, is that the appropriate number of teachers? Do we have the appropriate number of IAs? We've done a lot of collaborating with our union partners, specifically the Columbus Education Associations, to work together to create spaces for us to prevent this from occurring year after year. So we've got recruitment bonuses. We've got some opportunity to recruit from outside at the same level as other districts. So different things like that, where we're all recognizing and working together. This isn't just a special education issue. This is really a district-wide issue, and we all want to come together. And then we're working with HR to really revamp how we go about staffing, really getting out in front of instead of waiting, because as we've talked about, this is a national issue. So the pool of candidates that we have are the same pool that our surrounding districts have to choose from. So we want to be at the forefront and be able to be competitive in how we recruit and how we attain that staff right away. So, my goal, and it's not about me necessarily, but one of my goals is to make sure that teachers, prospective staff, hear all the amazing things, because we do have our challenges, and no one's going to say we don't. But I think for me, at the end of the day, I want everybody to want to work in Columbus City, because this is the place you want to be. We've got an amazing group of students that we have the ability to serve every day. We have amazing families, and we have an amazing staff who come in, and every time I'm out in a building, I am blown away by the talent that we have. And so having staff be able to come in, new staff, and learn from that talent, I think, to me, that's what I want to be able, the message I want to send, is that it's not about numbers, and it's not about, it really is about, we have an amazing group of educators that come in every day and believe in our kids, and come and be a part of that, because that is like no other opportunity you're going to have. So I think we're all passionate about the same thing. At the end of the day, it's obviously a numbers issue, but it's really more about, we have so much to offer, and I want everyone to come in. At some point, I want to be able to say, well, we don't have any space for you this year, but we'll keep your app on file because we have more than enough staff. In an opportunity. So really, I think working with department leaders throughout our organization that recognize and want those same things for our organization. And then I think the final component is giving our current staff hope that we're working on things. I appreciate, when people say, I've never looked elsewhere. I've never filled out another application. Because
Nor should you.
But again, having people want to be here, because at the end of the day, we get to serve an amazing group of kids. And that won't be replicated anywhere. So I think those are, what I would want to share about what we're doing.
Awesome. So, okay, last question, all right? I'm imagine a young full head of hair, Todd Walker, right? You know,
I need to see that picture.
that's right. I have pictures. I have proof. You know, fresh out of college, I want to be a teacher, right? And maybe I want to work with students with disabilities, right? What do you say? I mean, what's the secret sauce, right? That's essentially the question. Like, you all have done this work. You've experienced a level of success. You have longevity, you know, in the work. So you found a cadence that allows you to have enough work-life balance that you come back, right, every day and year after year. And so what advice would you give to a young Todd, a young Mickey, a young you, right, who is thinking about this work of teaching and perhaps thinking about working with, you know, some of our most vulnerable populations, right, which for us includes our students with disabilities. Certainly English language learners are in that as well. Curious to hear from each of you, and then we'll wrap up.
You could go first this time.
I guess I'm not even sure how to begin to answer that question. To give a teacher starting out in their career that has kept you motivated. I started out, as I told you, wasn't even sure what an IEP was going to be and how it was going to work out for me. But as I started out and I got to know the students that I was working with, I continued my education, keep doing that part. And one of the great things about Columbus City Schools is that there's a lot of great professional development. Mm-hmm. So build the people that you trust in your district. So keep your professional people around you. Find the good people. Here, you know, we used to have all those classes at Northgate all the time. Mm-hmm. I went to them all the time. The minute I would join the district, I went to all the PDs that were going on Thursday nights or on Saturdays or whatever, so that I could meet more people and in the district and get more training, get more education, because I was expanding the people that I knew in the district. Because sometimes you need to know who to call. You need to know how to make things happen in a district this large. Right. And that became invaluable. You want to make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do for your students. But if you expand, I guess, your professional group, it helps you in a district this large. It helps you be able to call and say, hey, what would you do in this situation? Find those good people that have been doing it, the people that are not sitting in the teacher's lounge griping all the time. You know, I try to find, as a CEA rep, I try to find the new teachers and talk to them. But I've never spent time in the teacher's lounge complaining. I'm working with kids all day long. That's what I go to school to do. But dive into the work and into making yourself a better teacher. Because if you stop that, I'm 30 plus years in, and I'm still taking classes. I'm still learning. With the increased number of kids with autism that I have today, I learn new things all the time. And the minute you stop that, you're done. I don't want to be that teacher who no longer can do the use the programs and all of the things that we need to do. You've got to learn to do them. You have to learn to do them. If you aren't,
my daughter says to me about cell phone usage, right? Like, Dad, you don't know how to do that? So I've gotten better. I'm still learning too.
I mean, but you have to stay on top of those things. It's part of your job. So you have to. Maybe I'm not the best, but I stay on top, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, I do. I'm a good learner with her, especially with the phone. I think you do know how to answer that question.
That was a great answer. Yes.
So, Dr. Tracy, what do you have to say?
So I would say, first of all, advice to new teachers: join your union.
Okay.
I would say that.
Support network.
The support network. Join the early career educator group if you're new to the profession, because there are other people who are going through what you're going through right now. I would say you don't have to be the expert. I think a lot of times as new people in a building, in the profession, we're afraid to say, I don't know. But it's okay that we don't know, because we're going through, you're new. You don't need to know it all. You need to know where to find the answers,
Absolutely.
like Keith said. So knowing that it's okay that you don't have to be the expert, but you have a building full of experts, I think, oftentimes I'll say, oh, I teach in Columbus City Schools, and I get that sympathetic head tilt and head shake. I choose to be here. I work with some of the smartest, most motivated geniuses there are in education in this district. And I think that it's okay as a new teacher not to know it all, because you have those people in the rooms next to you, in the building next to you, through your PAR consultants, in our department, through your special education coordinators, through your transition coordinators. You have the experts, so you don't have to be. And to know that sometimes it's okay to learn alongside your students, and that's, come back the next day, because you'll be the one to teach the next person what's going on.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add, I agree. I think find your people is huge. Find your people, be reflective. I think it's important to always be reflective. Tracy and I work in the same building, and I'll sometimes call her in and say, okay, now tell me, help me reflect. Because again, after 27 years, I think, I don't have all the answers. And I think it's important, for people to not look at somebody and go, oh, wait, I'm not like that person. Because it's like, wow, this is 27-year work in progress, right? So I think be okay to be in your space and in your time, because you're not going to be a new teacher forever. So while it's easy to say embrace the newness and the uncertainty, you will grow it, even if you don't think you will. I think the nuance with special ed is that it's okay that your kids aren't showing growth right in that moment. You have to be okay that growth might not come until the very end of the year. You might not see that one thing take shape until a teacher tells you a year later. So you have to almost, in special ed, in some cases, have blind faith, because it's a little different than gen ed, where I taught a skill and now I can see all my kids that learn that skill. Special ed is a little unique like that. So you have to give yourself grace that even if they're not showing you, they are learning and they're taking it in, and you have to have faith that what you're doing will make a difference, and it is making a difference. In addition to what Tracy and Keith said about getting, find your people, find your tribe, continue to reach out, it's okay to say you don't know, and reach out to somebody who does, because all those things sustain all of us every day. It just does. If I didn't have a Tracy to call or a Dr. Walker to call, you have to be able to do that, no matter where you are in your profession, but absolutely when you first start, especially if you're looking around going, oh, my goodness, these people know so much more than I do. And it's like, no, they just have had more time. Yeah. And wisdom comes with time. You're not expected to be wise at everything. So give yourself grace.
Yeah. You mentioned Helen Keller earlier. Right, and I'm butchering this, I'm sure I am, but one of the quotes, like from this story of her, is around, having sight and having vision aren't the same thing, right? And because she didn't have physical sight, but she had vision, right? And Anne Sullivan was a big part of helping, because Anne had a vision for her, she had a vision for herself, and I think that's what the best teachers do, right? Is they have a vision for their students, even when their students don't have a vision for themselves, and it transfers, right? It might not transfer right away, but eventually it transfers. I have kids now, where they're, in their 40s, right? Which, what does that say about me? I'm still 30. How does that work?
The math isn't mathing.
Yeah, the math isn't mathing. But they come back, right? And you see that you made that investment. So what I would conclude with, and I'm speaking directly to our teachers, specifically those teachers that are working with our students with disabilities. Thank you. We are appreciative for what you do. We're not making light of where we are right now. And we will continue to work diligently on all fronts to support the work that happens in the classroom, because that's the work. That's where it's the garden work, as Jay Sanchez would tell me. He used to say I said ground floor. He said, no, I'm in the garden. I'm planting seeds. So it's the garden work that is critical, right? It's where the seeds get planted and they get watered and eventually grow. And so please stay encouraged to all of our listeners, to all of those budding, want to be teachers, soon to be teachers. We want you. There's a place for you, and this is a great place to be at Columbus City Schools. Thank you to each of you, Keith, for all that you do. Making eye contact, Tracy, for you. Even though we have intense times of fellowship, we always come back.
Yeah, we do.
Thank you, Mickey, for giving us a window into the little Mickey. I understand you better now.
That little story, doesn't it?
And thank you to Rachel, our producer. She's off screen. You won't see her, but she's has been valuable to me. So thank you, Rachel. And thank you to the team that does the recording. And thank you to our listeners. Until next time, this is Teacher Chat. I'm Todd Walker. Have a great rest of your week. Bye now.